Without doubts, I think it's by far the best league in the world.
How dare you score like that in the Premier League?
Mission accomplished in the Premier League.
We are Liverpool fans, so let's put that disclaimer out there before the Everton hate starts, and then do our predictions for Everton. Quite the off season for them. I think it's gonna cause a lot of debate. I think so. Let's start with you, Gally, on this one, and let's start with their departures. Key one probably being one of my least favorites in Richarlison. What do you make of that move? What do you make of the fact that Everton, I don't know if it's the right word to say let him go, but I guess brought it to the point where they lost him because it seemed like he was at least their heart and soul going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think Everton was always going to struggle to hold on to a player long term. When they signed him from Watford, it was considered a pretty good coup for them. He had a good year at Watford. I mean, Watford basically stole him from Flamingo for a song. If you look at Richarlison and you remove his crazy eyes and the fact that I have, as said before, believe that he's, a terrible human being both on and off the pitch, which seems to be proven kind of rightfully true at times. His production in the Premier League for both Watford and Everton has been really, really good. He's proven that he can play wide. He's proven he can play inside as a striker. He's even proven he can play off a striker at times with Dominic Calvert-Lewin. So outside of the crazy eyes and really, looking like he's ready to hurt a player at any moment, I think that they lose a lot by letting him leave. And I think they lose a little bit of their identity. And I'm not sure that team would have stayed up last year if Richarlison wasn't kind of leading the line, to a lesser extent, him and Gordon. So I think it's an enormous loss when you're going to rely on, the 850-pound Solomon Rondon and Dominic Calvert-Lewin to care more about football than fashion. And I just don't know that those two are going to be able to score enough goals that get them in a different position of the table come April, May of next year than they were this year. So I think their outgoings is a lot of dead weight, as we see on the screen. But they, as we'll get to when we talk about their incomings, it's not like they've replaced them with any additional talent. And when you buy bad for 3 straight years, it sometimes comes back to bite you, and it feels like that's happening to Everton right now.
How dare you call Cenk Tosun dead weight? Going back to Turkey for the 5th time, I think. He's 31 now, so he'll probably stay there. Actually, this is news to me. I didn't know he had German in him. This just shows that you can have one decent tournament, come to the Premier League and just keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And he's back at Besiktas again. And yeah, I agree. The rest of it. And the problem is, Everton has spent so much money buying this dead weight. I mean, you're looking at it now and you're like, like you said, that's my natural reaction too. I mean, all these names that are gone, you're like, oh, it's like dead weights. But they paid some decent money to get this dead weight in the first place. Let me ask you the Richarlison question as well there, Bickler, because, I mean, he is one of my top hated guys, and it's not because he plays for Everton. It's just him. I'm the last guy to make fun of people's appearances because, the biggest joke is on me. But he always reminds me like one of those guys in like the Fifth Element. I don't know why. And his like just antics on the field, but I just don't know. I would love to hear from Everton fans. I know they really like in terms of like what he brings, but to me, it comes across as one of those players that you love him if he's on your team, but everybody else hates him.
For sure.
Right, Bickler? What do you think?
If I'm an Everton fan, I fucking love it. I love him. Yep. Like, he's a total wind-up. And, like, I mean, this is not a very good, like, comparison, right? But, like, I mean, when I was a player, I used to love that. I used to love to get under people's skin. I mean, I used to love to,
really? I would never have guessed.
I know that's shocking, right? But, like, I honestly think you need that. Like, I think you need a little bit of that on a side. Like, I think you need a little bit of steel in a way that's a little bit mischievous. And I think like his mischief sometimes crosses a line, but like I think in the heat of competition, I'm okay with that, man. Like I think is he that far off from what Luis Suarez did? And as Liverpool fans, we like idolize Luis Suarez. Like I know there's a deep divide between some of the things he did with Evra or what he did with, obviously the biting incidents, but like I don't think Rick Carlson has hit those heights, but like I think he does a lot of that same stuff. And I think internally there's just this insane desire to do whatever you need to do to win. And like I will never fault a player for that. Never. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a big loss for them. I look at what they got for him. I'm surprised they didn't get more, but then I look at the fees for Sterling and all around the rest of the world football right now, and the fees are lower. Like, I mean, we talk about what Liverpool played for Darwin, right? And I think, you look at what his wages are over 5 years, and that makes a little bit more sense in the fact that a lot of that are rising costs with bonus incentives that need to be hit. But I think across the world, we're seeing fees lower because of COVID stuff and the financial state of most of these teams. So I think that's just another blow to Everton where they could have probably recouped more had we not gone through these COVID years. If I'm Everton and I'm looking for a silver lining, I'm looking for the fact that we have Calvin Lewin, who we know can produce, paired with Damari Gray and Anthony Gordon. And that's my silver lining for them. You got Tarkowski, which I think is a really good free pickup because, I mean, look, if you're going to get barraged on the back line, at least somebody who's got experience with that. Tarkowski grew up in a bomb shelter and then went to Burnley, which is essentially an extenuation of a bomb shelter. And so you've got a center back who's experienced with just getting bombed on. He was statistically in the top 3 of every major category as a center back. So I think it's a good free signing for him. Like besides the fact that he's scoring on them in preseason, I mean, I think he's going to be fine. So, I mean, it's interesting to see what's going to happen the rest of this window because right now they look like a team who's treating this window as if you got relegated into the championship. And can they do that? Can they bleed off their big players and not reinvest in the squad and survive this year? I don't know that they can. But I also don't know if they're in a financial position where they can strengthen to the point they need to strengthen. And that's the really scary part if you're an Everton fan.
And I think that's the issue, the financial side of it. And, again, not because he's at Everton, but I can't stand Fat Frank. And again, me calling somebody fat is probably not that appropriate either, but I'm on a roll in this segment, so let's keep rolling. But yeah, I mean, I just don't think he is the kind of coach that's gonna, we were talking before this about Crystal Palace and we were talking about like Vieira. I have more confidence in a manager like that in terms of getting more out of the young talents as opposed to somebody like Frank. Where do you sit on that, Gally?
Yeah, so I believe they stayed up despite Frank Lampard. I honestly believe hiring Frank Lampard was the biggest mistake they made all of last campaign. It didn't make sense at the time. And I feel like, he did a few good things. Obviously, he got a couple big results down the stretch. But I really feel like the players did that. And Richarlison was a huge part of that. That didn't feel like it was a tactical change to anything. He'd go from a 3, he'd switch to a 4, he'd go back to a 3 mid-match. It was like he was lost. It was like he had no identity, which shouldn't shock anyone because he had no identity at Chelsea. And he had no real identity prior to that, even when he was at Derby. So, he struggled with that. And I think that is a big, big key for him. Where I look at, sorry.
No, go ahead.
What I'm also thinking about on this is that I think that if you asked me, I'd make him the betting favorite to be the first manager fired this season. They have a brutal start to the campaign. They have literally, Men in Blazers made the great tweet this week that Everton is going to successfully become the first team ever to be relegated from the MLS. They came on an American tour and lost all 3 matches to MLS teams, including being down 3-0 in 28 minutes to Minnesota. Minnesota was playing reserves. They started their first 11. It was like a collection of errors. And the crazy part was in the second half, Minnesota went to some of their starters and actually took the pedal off because I think they were afraid the young Everton kids might start coming through with leg-breaking tackles because they were down 4-0 in Minnesota. And it's not getting any better. So for me, I would predict, I don't know if we're there yet, but if Fat Frank sticks around, I think he's out before the World Cup. If Fat Frank is there past the World Cup, I think Everton is deep in a relegation battle again, 15th to 18th. But I'll put this caveat to Paul's point. If Damari Gray improves on his start last year, which I think he will without Richarlison there, he'll be more offensive-minded. He'll play off the striker. I think Gordon kicks on and they can hold on to him. There's talk Newcastle might offer $40 million. If they do that, I don't know how Everton doesn't snap and take the money because he could have been a one-year wonder. And lastly, if Frank goes, this job might have Pochettino written all over it. And if you put a guy who knows how to coach young players, if you give him Damari Gray, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and you give him Anthony Gordon, you give him the young center backs, that Mikolenko kid that they got at left back was a really good buy in January. Like, they have some pieces there. And then if you get some other youth kids and you get a guy like Pochettino, maybe he revitalizes Dele Alli. Like, that's the type of job he's going to get. Pochettino's coming to the Premier League this year. He's either getting hired by Leicester or Everton or somebody, and he'll make them better. And I would be fearful if he went there because I think what he did at Southampton and even at times in Tottenham was with just as little talent to start, and he builds them into players. And this could be a landing spot for him, and I wouldn't like it because it makes them more competitive because he's clearly a good manager, whether he has great talent or not. Maybe a better manager when he has bad talent.
And I think that's why Lampard was a mistake, like you were saying too. They needed, knowing their financial situation and knowing what they're going to need moving, further after this, like after last season. I know they were in the relegation battle, but it's not like you brought on a coach that is used to relegation battles and, can get you out of them or anything like that. He'd never seen it in his life. So it was more of a panic mode. I think it's a lot of drive and, especially like the home games and stuff. And going back to Tarkowski, that's what I want to kind of ask you there, Bickler, because you mentioned, I agree that in terms of playing in a team like Burnley, who just kind of like constantly sits back and crowds and just like heads out to everything that comes in, I just don't know if he's going to perform as well in an Everton team where the crowd is not going to be happy if they're just sitting at home. The crowd kind of pushes them forward. The crowd wants them playing in a more of like an attacking game. And I just don't see him adjusting to that as well. So I want to get your take on that. And the second one, I kind of like asked this when we were talking about Crystal Palace and when we were talking about Zaha. The loss of Richarlison, Gally was talking about like Gray because he did start the season like ridiculously good, and it was like, holy cow, this is going to be some move for them, and it kind of like fizzled out. Does it make it more difficult on a player like Gordon if he stays and Gray? Because really, you took that one player that was a thorn in everybody's side when they played against them. Now you can kind of pay more attention to somebody like Gray or Gordon.
I don't think so. I mean, to me, you're going to get Damari out wide, which is where you probably want him, versus tucking him in almost as an attacking mid behind those players. So I think that you're going to see him in a position that suits his game naturally a little better. So, I mean, you can. This is like that same argument we made with Zaha, right? Like, does it make a player like him better with that primary talent out of front of him? And I don't know. I mean, I think there's going to be a little bit of both. I think for me, I think it will make him better because he'll be out wide where he can use his pace in space. In terms of Tarkowski, he's an interesting one because I always thought that Tarkowski had some pretty good offensive attributes. Like, I felt like he was pretty good with the ball at his feet. I felt like he was pretty good going forward, and he's super underrated at set pieces. Like, he's very good in the air.
Yeah.
And I think that like maybe him playing in a system that's a little bit more open, I think suits him better in terms of that. I think he did well at Burnley because I don't think he was able to use his pace, but he has strength and height, and I think he was able to use those things, right? So I think the thing that will kill Tarkowski is the fact that he won't have two bodies stacked in front of him sitting back. That's the thing that's going to kill him. But he has the pace to stick in and recover. It's just a matter of it's just a simple matter of him not having as much protection, which affects any center back, regardless of how good you are. The less protection you have, the more vulnerable you are. What I like about Tarkowski is I think he has the skill set and the pace to be okay on an island if he needs to be.
Yeah, the thing I worry about, especially, I mean, if they lose Gordon, that's a huge loss. And you kind of refer to him. Before I go back to Galley, let me get your take on Gordon Bickler, because Galley was mentioning that he could possibly be a one-season wonder, and it might be smart, especially for a cash-strapped team, to cash in on him. Do you see him as that? Or, I mean, to me, he was the only thing that I think most Everton fans could see as a positive. So selling that, despite obviously the financial gains, how do you balance that out?
I don't think he's a one-season wonder personally. I think if you sell him in this window, regardless of what you get for him, you basically guarantee your relegation. That's how strongly I feel about it. I feel from a business standpoint, say he doesn't have the year he has last year, he's so young that the probability that his value will continue to rise over time versus what you sell him in this year is it's almost a guarantee that he's going to continue to raise his value off of last year. And I think that selling him no matter what this year would be just a massive mistake. I think at this point, it's critical that you hang on to your young talent, not only from just a performance development standpoint, but from a financial standpoint, I think it's critical that you hang on to your young guys.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if he's a one-season wonder or not. He might be, he might not be. I just know, when I asked the question about Richarlison, one thing I did not like about him was his movement. He made a lot of runs off the ball, creating a lot of space for other players, and that's what kind of made him dangerous too. It's a guy that you always have to watch. I mean, with Gordon, I think the price would be financially hard to turn down money-wise, but it's just the psychological punch in the guts is what I'd be worried about, right, Gally? I mean, in terms of what it would mean to the rest of the team.
No question. And I wasn't advocating. I don't think he's a one-season wonder either. I do think he's got some real issues in his game. To lead the Premier League as a teenager in dives is not a good look. Having multiple times being booked for simulation in your first professional season is not a good look. It's not something you want to get dinged with. The other thing, the rumblings, and I read an article in the Echo earlier this week, is that he won't negotiate contract terms because his people are so outlandish that he basically should be the highest paid player at the club. So I think he might not have the best voices. So if Newcastle were to come in and be offering him a wage packet that was much higher, maybe he'd even be pushing and not signing a deal. The other argument is they've been linked to both Maxwell Cornet and Alan St. Maximin, which would both become their best player, I believe, talent-wise, if they signed. So, I think you keep Gordon no matter what if you're smart. But if they pull off, and supposedly they're negotiating personal terms at this point because they're willing to pay the $20 million release clause. If they can get Cornet, that's as big of a coup as it was when Cornet went to Burnley. And if they were to get Alan St. Maximin, for me, I'm not a huge fan. I love watching him play, but I wouldn't want him on my team or at my club.
Exactly.
He doesn't do enough of my stuff. But I could see him being a big success. I don't want him at Everton. So those are things that I could see changing this window. If one of those two players were to sign, I would feel very confident that Everton would finish somewhere between 14 and 16 and probably be out of the relegation zone, which for an Everton fan might be music to their ears right now, because I think if they're going into this campaign, the only thing they can hang their hat on is that Bournemouth and Fulham are in the Premier League, and so is Forest. Because other than that, they would be my odds-on pick of any team who staved off relegation last year to go down this year.
Yeah, I think like the thing with Gordon is he probably knows. I mean, he has. I mean, the outrage that would come from the fans if they did move him or if they lost him. Because I think, I mean, apart from like Richarlison, we were talking about earlier, I think he's a fan favorite over there, and he's seen as the future. And he was, seen as the. I mean, I would watch a lot of like their like fan TV and stuff like that after their games because it's good entertainment. And a lot of the talk was, I mean, he looked like the only guy trying in certain games. And I know, sometimes it's just appearances, but I know like the fans will be big on him, so he knows his value right now is big in terms of like social media and the public perception wise, aside from like just football business wise.
Let's be real. We give all the credit to Richarlison, right? We talk about it. Richarlison's energy, his efforts, Gordon's pizzazz, Frank's shortcomings. If we're being real and we're being objective as the goal of this podcast or of this show, even when we talk about Everton,
sing it.
Tyrannosaurus Rex arms Jordan Pickford, as much as we hate him, as much as he should have been arrested for assault for what he did on our campaign coming off the title and taking out Van Dijk, he was single-handedly the reason they stayed up. He had 2 or 3 heroic performances, including like a 14-save clean sheet that got them 3 of those points. He was huge down the stretch, and he was basically the vocal leader that kept any form of defensive stability that they had. And it pains me to say those nice things about him, but don't worry, the World Cup's coming, and he'll let everyone in England down again, and we'll all be able to make jokes. But he was their best player last year, top to bottom, probably. He is their club's leader, which is kind of disgusting to say out loud. But they're in the championship right now, and he might be at Newcastle as the starting keeper instead of Nick Pope at Newcastle because Burnley went down, in my opinion, if he wasn't in between the sticks. And it pains me to say it, but we did a whole thing on them, and we didn't talk about maybe the player who has been the most influential there since he got there. But he's just so damn annoying, and it's so nice to watch him make a fool out of himself. But really, it was his antics that helped them stay up. He gives them an identity, as terrible as that is.
Yeah, you're going to need a shower after that serenade for Pickford over there.
You were the one who asked me to be objective.
So where do they end up, Bickler? Can Everton fans?
I mean, I'm with you guys right now. For me, it's like 16 to 18, right? I think if they get a couple of signings in, like they can move up some spots. Like a Cornet would be huge for them. But yeah, for right now, they got to be pushing that relegation battle as it stands now. I don't know how. I think the main point is like they're in a really, really tough financial spot with the wrong manager. So
how does that ever work out well?
Yeah, exactly.
What do you have for him, Gally?
I said it before.
Serenade, I think the bad news is coming.
It's 15 to 18, and honestly, they could easily finish 19th because I think the team we're going to talk about next, Fulham, has a better roster actually top to bottom. I just have to question whether or not they can do it in the Prem League, and we'll get there. But I think it's 15 to 18. Give me a Maxwell Cornet or another signing defensively. Maybe they're 13 to 15, but they're no better than bottom of the table, just barely out of the relegation zone, in my opinion.